Risk-averse households generally have greater marginal utility of wealth when wealth is low or highly uncertain. Point 2. Therefore, I measure two forms of cyclical income risk. Permanent income cyclicality measures the desirability of stocks due to covariation in permanent labor income level and unexpected stock returns. Permanent labor income variance cyclicality measures the desirability of stocks due to covariation in permanent labor income variance and unexpected stock returns. My first main finding is that these unconditional and cyclical labor income risks are positively related with financial risks for households in the SCF. Controlling for household demographics and other sources of household wealth, such as home or private business ownership, does not explain this puzzle. Risk preferences remain the most promising explanation for the seemingly counter-theoretical relationships of labor income and financial risks. The SCF provides a self-reported measure of willingness to accept financial risks, a proxy for risk tolerance. I use this measure to shed light on the relationship of labor income and financial risks. Past researchers have shown that this risk preference measure in the SCF is related to household stock investment. Point 3. I show that the SCF risk preference measure is also related to labor income risk. Point 4. For example, I show that households with greater permanent income variance, such as workers in business services industries or the self-employed, report significantly greater willingness to accept financial risks. I investigate whether the relationships between labor income risks and risk preferences are coincidental or evidence of self-selection. I find that the positive relationship between permanent income variance and self-reported risk preferences relates to employment characteristics over which the household has significant control. In contrast, the relationship of the other three risks to self-reported risk preferences occurs primarily through worker demographics, which are largely outside the household's control. This leaves doubt that aspects of labor income risk beyond permanent labor income variance enter meaningfully into employment decisions. How does the endogenous distribution of risks affect conclusions about how households respond to labor income risks? To fully account for the role of risk preferences, I must deal with the measurement error in self-reported preferences. I use characteristics of the households, workers, and employment as instruments for the self-reported risk preferences. The instrumentation strategy assumes that employment characteristics, industry, occupation, and unionization and self-employment status affect household stock allocations and leverage only indirectly through observed worker and household characteristics, labor income risks, and risk preferences. Point 5. Once I account for household risk preferences, the puzzling relationships between labor income and financial risks disappear. Tobit regressions predict that a one-standard deviation increase in permanent income variance leads to an increase of 3.35% in household stock allocation when risk preferences are ignored. This changes to a 3.16% decrease once instrumented risk preferences are included as controls, a sign and magnitude consistent with theory. The impact of a one standard deviation increase in permanent income variance on household leverage, debt-equity ratio, changes from 0.02 to -0.13 when controls for risk preferences are added, implying a 28% debt reduction for the typical household in the data. Point 6. While I find evidence that households do respond to permanent income variance, I find no evidence that households adjust their stock allocations significantly in response to the Other 3 labor income risks. I also find no evidence that the disaster risk, probability of job loss, affects household leverage. The lack of significant response of either financial risks or career choice to disaster risk may suggest that individuals are uncertain or unaware of their unemployment risk. The lack of portfolio response to the hedgeable cyclical labor income risks may additionally relate to narrow framing of risks. In order for households to respond optimally to their cyclical labor income risks, they must recognize and consider the statistical relationships between their labor income and stock returns. Such broad framing seems unlikely given that workers appear to miss out on substantial benefits of hedging labor income risks within their stock portfolios. Point 7. This paper builds on previous research on how households adjust stock holdings in response to labor income risks. Point 8. Apart from demonstrating the importance of risk preference heterogeneity, I make 3 other contributions to the literature. Point 9. First, the set of unconditional and cyclical labor income risks I measure provides a more comprehensive description of the relevant aspects of labor income risk. Household responses to labor income disaster risk and variance cyclicality have not previously been studied. Secondly, I use a 4-decade time series and allow labor income to respond to unexpected stock returns with a lag. Both features are necessary to find the economically and statistically significant relationships between labor income and stock returns that might be expected. Point 10. Finally, I extend the analysis of household financial risks to consider leverage. Section 1.2 of the paper describes the modeling, estimation, and distribution of the 4 labor income risks. Section 1.2 investigates the relationships between labor income risks, household financial risks, and self-reported risk preferences. Section 1.4 concludes. Conversely, the PSID has a smaller cross-section and only rudimentary data on household financial risks, but it provides a 4-decade panel data series on labor income and employment data. To use the strengths of both datasets, I develop a model which instruments the components of labor income risk using a set of worker demographics and employment characteristics, CHAR, which are found in both the SCF and the PSID. I then use the PSID to calibrate the model. This model is used in turn to estimate labor income risk for workers in the SCF as a function of their CHAR. I start with a simple model of labor income dynamics described in Meghere and Pistafari. 2011. In this model, observed log labor income is characterized by a deterministic component, homoscedastic permanent shocks, temporary shocks which follow an MA1 process, and measurement error. This is the simplest model which is able to adequately describe the variance of log labor income over both short and longer horizons. Permanent shocks are a useful feature as they are more easily interpreted in terms of their impact on welfare. Equation 1.1 below is the adapted specification I use, expressed in terms of the observed labor income growth of worker